Now that I've told Maya what I want my output to be, and I'm feeling comfortable with where the output is going to go and what the output looks like, I've done a quick little test so I know about how long my render is going to take. All I need to do is start the render running. Now for me, the easiest way to do this is to just come into my drop down here and change my top menu bar to rendering, because that gives me easy access to the render menu, which is awesome. You can get your render settings window here. You can get a bunch of other stuff. But really the only thing we're going to care about today is that this is where renderSequence lives. Render sequencing is a relatively new process. They just added it a couple of years ago. Before we render sequenced, we used a process called batch rendering. Here's the difference. Render sequencing is a foreground process, which means that once I start this running, I'm going to lock up Maya. My computer is going to render and do nothing else. Will you be able to use other programs, watch movies, etc.? Sure, but it's going to slow your render down even more. So what you might want to do is start your render sequence running, leave your computer somewhere where you can jiggle it and make sure it's not falling asleep, and then take a break. You know about how long your render is going to take. If it's going to be an hour, maybe you go out for a walk. Maybe you go get some coffee. If it's going to be a couple of hours, maybe you go out with friends or go out to dinner. If it's going to be 10 hours, maybe you just change all of your computer settings so that it doesn't go to sleep, and then you go to sleep yourself. Because render sequencing is a foreground process, it's going to happen first, and then everything else on your computer is going to happen. The old process, batch rendering, was a background process. A background process means it happens last, so everything else happens first, and then the batch render happens. So will your render be a little slower? Yeah, but it means that you can keep working on things while it's going on. It's not going to lock up your computer the way render sequencing does. So why do we render sequence? Batch rendering seems like a much better deal. It does, except that you have to pay extra for it. So if you batch render, you're going to get a big watermark over all of your files. And if you render sequence, you won't. And for where we all are in life, that's a big plus. We don't want that watermark, we just want to have our movie. So we're going to render sequence, and it's going to be a foreground process because none of us are willing to pay to batch render. It's just not worth it. So with render sequencing, just be aware this is going to make your computer sound like an airplane because everything's happening right at the forefront of its processes. You're going to run it through the option box. If you have a camera in the scene, make sure that you're running through the correct camera. That's about it. I mean, having this one option is utterly worth it to open the render sequence box. Just make sure you're running through the right camera. That's the only option you can really change. It's the only option you want to change. That's it. Just check your camera, and then you can either hit render sequence and close, or you can hit render sequence. I will just start this process off. Let's just make sure I'm not overwriting the one that I already did for this demonstration, and we'll just do 2 frames just so you can see the process. So I'm going to hit render sequence, and now you'll watch Maya opens up its own render view, which is a little different from the Arnold render view, and it's going to render into this window. My computer is obsessed with rendering into this window, and it's not going to be happy if I do anything else. It's going to render all the way through once, it's going to render all the way through twice. When it's finished with the first frame, it'll just move over to the second frame, and so on and so forth until it finishes all of your frames, which is why I'm only doing 2 frames here. So this is where you get to take a break and your computer gets to do a lot of work. I generally really enjoy this process because I feel like I do a lot of work all the time, and it's only fair that my computer do some as well. So you're going to take a break here. I'm going to take a break here. When we all get back, we are going to process all of our frames so that they come together and they make a movie.